language. So therefore, we need you as well if there are any questions in time to ask them in English. Okay, our last panel today is about statelessness and refugees, a new contemporary defiance. Very important. Our guest here today is Andrea Mohan, legal counselor on the Iranian National Council for Refugees, and Laura Yesudo, from Protection Officer from the UN agency, the United Nations Commissioner, High Commissioner for Refugees. Very name, but beautiful name. Yes. And they will be our speakers today regarding the subject of discussion. They will tell you more. Now, my request to you is, if possible, to be an interactive discussion. So, if you have questions, please ask them away, no matter how many you have. I think we'll begin the discussion with Laura. So, you have the stage.
Bună ziua! Thank you very much for the very warm invitation that was shared with my office. I understand this is the first Young Ambassadors Forum, so we'd like to congratulate you on it, for the excellent organization and communication. I'm really pleased to be here with you, and along with a colleague from CaleaEuropeana. I was asked to talk about refugees and statelessness and what are the present challenges that one meets. Although I've been in Romania for almost 2 years now, the focus of my presentation will be more global, because I understand that your interest is more so not just the situation in Romania, but what's happening globally in terms of refugees and statelessness. So with that, I will start with perhaps a little video presentation that tells you what UNHCR is and who are refugees. Maybe that makes it a little bit more interesting in understanding the concept. While waiting, perhaps I could just also tell you that that bits of this presentation or the lecture were taken from various speeches and documents that are available on our website, unhcr.org, as well as from specific speeches by the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection in UNHCR. So I just want to make sure copyright is duly dealt with right from the onset. It belongs to the organization. Technical problems? It has Romanian subtitles, so I hope that will be helpful.
I don't know, I'm not the tech guy.
This is where you have to let your imagination run wild. Could the volume be rectified, or then there's no volume? Sorry for the technical problem.
Governments needed help. The crisis needed coordination. In December 1950, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner The faces tell our story. The displaced, the disowned, the depressed. pride. They are who we are, who we help. Lives uprooted, torn apart by wars, conflicts, persecution, natural disasters. All of the people of concern, the United Nations Refugee Agency. The Second World War left nations torn apart and refugees fleeing their homelands. More than 1 million of them. Governments needed help. The crisis needed coordination. In December 1950, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was established. In July 1951, the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees was adopted. A refugee is someone outside his or her own country and unable to return as a result of a well-founded fear of persecution on grounds of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a social group. Its founders thought UNHCR's task would take just 3 years. They were wrong. In 1956, Hungarians rose up against Soviet occupation and were crushed. 200,000 people fled their country. It was UNHCR's first emergency. The 1960s saw decolonization in Africa and wars, independence wars, civil wars, border wars. Hundreds of thousands were forced to flee. Refugees were no longer just a post-World War European issue. They could be found across the world. And so the legal foundation guiding UNHCR's work was changed in the 1967 protocol to be a global responsibility for refugees. In the 1970s, the spotlight of conflict shone on Latin America and Asia. In the 1980s and 1990s, new wars erupted in Africa, the Middle East, Southern Europe. The numbers of those in need spiraled upward in Lebanon, Somalia, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Uganda. In 1951, UNHCR started with 34 employees. By the end of 2013, it had over 8,000 working in 126 countries. 146 countries had signed the Convention on Refugees. Its work recognized with Nobel Peace Prizes in 1954 and 1981. By the end of the 20th century, in a world of civil wars, ethnic conflict, natural disasters, there were new victims. Driven from their homes but not their countries, UNHCR's guiding principles identified a new group of people in need, the internally displaced. Internally displaced persons are persons or groups of persons who have been forced or obliged to flee or to leave their homes or places of habitual residence, in particular as a result of or in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, situations of generalized violence, violations of human rights, or natural or human-made disasters, and who have not crossed an internationally recognized state border. As conflicts have altered, so has the role of UNHCR. In the Balkans, UNHCR moved to work directly in the conflict zones, something it has not done in its first 4 decades. It continues to do so to this day. In the new century, the world has the highest number of refugees in over 2 decades. Long, bitter wars in Somalia and Afghanistan, ethnic religious strife in Central African Republic, Syria, South Sudan, an old country and the world's newest, both engulfed in conflict. All add to the immense, sad list of victims. The challenges will grow. New, bitter conflicts and old crises unhealed. Millions displaced. UNHCR, over 60 years after its birth, will face them all, innovating, adapting, and counting on protection mandates, one of the strongest in international law. Partnerships with over 900 other agencies, and strong support from donors, governments, and people like you.
That was quite a sobering video to reflect on the situation in many parts of the world. And as it was mentioned there, we've seen unprecedented numbers of refugees, displaced persons.
Este dificil de foarte multe ori, de foarte multe lucruri.
Yes, my Romanian, very fluent, with a manly voice. Yeah.
My colleague from immigration.
Coming back to what we were talking about earlier, it's really a sobering account. I have had the privilege and honor with working with this organization for the past 14 years. Romania is the 11th country that I've worked in, and in different capacities, in contractual situations. Some of these places that we see there, I used to work in, whether it was in Myanmar, in South Sudan, in some other post-conflict situations. And what I can say is that it's been a very enriching experience. Challenging, no doubt, but interesting nonetheless. And I hope that from my little experience that I can share with you some of the challenges and the realities that arise with the complex situation that we have today. The world for millions at the moment is a very precarious situation. For many, life is one that's lived in fear on a day-to-day basis. Has it's not an abstract concept. Our last statistics on persons of concern to UNHCR dated January 2014 was a staggering 46 million people globally. Now these include asylum seekers, refugees, stateless persons, returnees, and internally displaced persons. Now, for the purposes of this session, I will be focusing mainly on refugees and stateless persons per se. And the statistics we have show an indication of some 11 million refugees just in 2014, or as of early January 2014, and 10 million stateless persons. That's like the size of a country, or two countries even, you know, or several countries, depending on which countries you're referring to. It's a staggering number of people whose lives have been affected because of conflict, because of man-made reasons even. As you know, the past year hasn't been a very easy one. There have been the outbreak of new conflicts, the festering and eruption of old conflicts, a re-eruption of old conflicts, and so on and so forth, and you keep seeing new flows of displaced persons. What does these circumstances, what challenges do these circumstances present to us? Now, before I talk about some of the challenges faced by these individuals as well as governments, let us just try to understand the concept. Who is a refugee? What is a refugee? There were some examples given just, or some definitions given earlier. But as your colleague Octavian suggested, let's try to make this a little bit more of an interactive session. What do you think is a refugee? Anyone? Any takers? Excellent. Well done. I'm impressed. Anyone else? Yeah? Well, there are two sorts of definitions that we work on. One is the 1951 Refugee Convention. As you saw earlier, it refers to persons who flee or cannot return to their country of origin or habitual residence because of 5 grounds. Number one, they have 5 reasons, 5 elements there, and 5 reasons. Number one, they have a well-founded fear of persecution persecution is number two, and the reasons that they have this well-founded fear of persecution is because of one of what we call five convention grounds. It could be their race, their nationality, religious beliefs, their religion, membership of a particular social group, and political opinion. Now, I think you and I can think of many examples of refugees that we know who fall within this definition. People who convert to certain religions or who have certain religious beliefs which are persecuted in their country. People who are political opponents in countries where this is strongly suppressed and persecuted with gross human rights violations. Certain ethnic groups or tribes or racial groups that are also discriminated or severely discriminated and persecuted as well. So if you think about it, you can think of many countries where these are happening. And this is what we call the refugee definition under the convention, the 51 Convention. Now, in some other regions, you have what we call the extended definition. It's a wider definition of a refugee. Like in Latin America, as well as in Africa. Now, you have the you have definitions that cover people who are fleeing generalized conflict, generalized violence, public disturbances, so on and so forth. I won't go into the specifics of the definitions and the actual terminology, but it recognizes individuals fleeing such circumstances. And this is due to the peculiar aspects of conflicts, post-colonialization, wars for independence, so on and so forth in these regions. So if you are in those regions, then if you are fleeing such circumstances, you are also considered a refugee. Now, in the European context, you're not considered a refugee as such if you flee for those specific reasons, unless if you meet the grounds we mentioned earlier. Individual fear of well-founded fear of persecution for one of the five grounds. However, under the recast qualification directive, EU qualification directive, it does provide what we call subsidiary protection. It's a form of complementary protection for people who do flee generalized violence, so on and so forth, as well as other situations where people flee torture, imprisonment, or imprisonment might result in the imposition of the death penalty, so on and so forth. So, in general, there is coverage for providing protection to these persons, regardless of how you label it. Now, what I wanted to show you is another video, just to put a face to what we're talking about when we talk about persecution, when we talk about indiscriminate violence. Perhaps your colleague can play the next video slide, which is about a refugee child's plight. And this is a refugee called, a little girl called Shahda, who suffered who suffered trauma and basically survived indiscriminate violence in Syria.
Shahad is 4 years old. In Arabic, her name means the sweetest part of the family. It is a miracle that Shahad is alive today. But the scars on her face reveal how close she came to losing her life. The day was September the 19th, 2012. Her family home was the target of attack. The entire building collapsed into a pile of rubble. Panic and fear ensued. Lives were lost. But some, like Mahmoud, were saved. It was a day of tragedy that her father can never forget.
لقينا مجزرة، مو مجزرة، مجزرة مو أي يلا مجزرة، 24 نفر كانوا تحت البيت، راحوا لي فرع شهداء، طلعوا فرع شهداء وطلعنا شنو طعن جلد، كانوا بيطلعوا الجرح من الساعة تقريبا الساعة 10 الصبح للساعة 3 العصر، فقط ولاد، الولد عمره 9 والبنت عمرها 2.
Yahya gathered Shahad and the remaining members of his family and escaped to neighboring Lebanon. Shahad tried to hide his scars and his wounds. She is too young to talk about what she experienced, but her father worried for his daughter.
يعني ما عليك في عندنا الطبلة هاي عارض حرب شافت الطيران الجديد الإسماعيلية البورتية الصواريخ الكويت شافتهم الكيماوي شافتهم ما الله في أوسع نكون باقي الساعة 2 الليل نايم أخواننا لا ما سمعنا قبل بضعة راح بيت راح شوية وكان 13 شهر.
Overnight, they became yet another Syrian refugee family on the run.
أنا هاي أول مرة أشوف معناته من دول شعب بدأ كل يوم على لبنان على تركيا على الأردن الفرد ولاده فقط أهله كم تحت البحر الذين
Now life for Yahya and his family is about daily survival. Yahya's brother Hassan still has shrapnel lodged in his leg. Yahya's wife Fatima suffers from trauma. The memories of her loss are too painful to bear. With the young Shahad, life goes on. She finds delight in the simplest of pleasures. And her laughter brings moments of solace to a family living with the scars of this conflict.
Thank you. I hope that sort of brought home a message to you, because I don't know about you, but if I watch the news every day and I keep hearing about Syria, Palestinian situation, so on and so forth, at a certain point you kind of get a little numb and you block it all out from your system. But the reality is this is somebody's life, and it is affecting millions. And it's the fifth year into its conflict now in Syria, and it doesn't seem to be changing. It doesn't seem like it's likely to end soon. Let me correct myself. Changing, yeah, it changes its face in many ways in terms of the ugliness of the conflict and how it evolves, but it doesn't seem to be coming to an end. There's a lot of challenges in terms of the political will to actually end the conflict. And the results are that we have millions who are displaced internally and externally, and individuals like Shahda's lives are affected. And it's easy to become a bit hardened because that's our self-protection mechanism. But it's important to also know that this is reality for many. So the first section we talked about who is a refugee. We talked about those fleeing persecution. We talked about those fleeing or unable to return because of serious risk linked to indiscriminate violence. And we put a face to it. Now, this is a little picture I took from a helicopter in Myanmar. We were on a military helicopter following the conflict between the ethnic Rohingyas and Rakhines in June 2012. It's a little refugee camp, one of the more organized ones. All the pictures that you will see in the slides are my personal pictures taken from work in different locations. That's the little Rakhine girl receiving, ethnic Rakhine girl from Myanmar receiving early child education under our projects. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There are lots of positive interventions that have been provided, support provided by various governments and entities. Think about it, with the huge number of displacements, many of the countries that are affected, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and in Africa, whether it's Ethiopia or Kenya, so on and so forth, are poor countries. Tanzania, this picture was taken in 2006, I think, in Tanzania. It's one of the buses that we used to help some Burundian refugees return voluntarily repatriate to their country. These areas that we live in, work in, and where they are hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees are poor areas. And the governments are generous in terms of solidarity sharing, in terms of burden and responsibility sharing, and actually leaving their borders open for people who need protection to come and seek protection, sharing resources. And you'll find that some of the challenges are linked to depleting resources, competing claims by host communities who also live in poverty and have their own challenges. So this is something that we see as remarkable, the generosity of the human spirit that you see in many of these places, not by governments per se or governments alone, but also by communities, local communities. There have also been politicians who've made a stand in wanting to avoid or defending the refugee cause when there's a lot of political pressure to close borders and to have a harsh stance on some of these issues. Billions have been spent on healthcare, education, water, sewage, housing, so on and so forth to cope with the situation. And equally, there are many donor countries that have contributed to dealing with this humanitarian situation. But let's talk about the challenges now. Despite all of this, there remains a lot of challenges. Many people take unsafe travel routes. You may have heard of the recent boat that capsized in the Mediterranean Sea, and it's believed that possibly some 650 individuals or so have perished at sea, and this is one of countless tragedies in the sea. When I was working in Yemen, I remember that there were lots of reports of similar incidences across the Gulf of Aden, where people from the Horn of Africa were trying to get to safety, or we were coming from Somalia, Eritrea, and so on and so forth, and there were lots of people who were perishing there. When I was in Myanmar and also across the border in Bangladesh, we had the same thing with regards to Rohingya refugees, who or the stateless persons who were trying to flee persecution, and they were going in unseaworthy vessels and in the hands of smugglers, even human traffickers, and they suffer loss of life at sea and a whole range of gross human rights violations. And there are also some countries that have begun to put barriers to prevent people from coming in and through regular entry, and this makes people start resorting to irregular means of traveling, and of course that makes them more vulnerable to criminals. Other threats that emerge is that even though people may reach safety, they may reach a country where they might find safety, there are the problems linked to sexual violence, exploitation at work, arbitrary detention, enslavement, so on and so forth. Now, over the years, especially in the past, there have been cases of refoulement. That is when somebody is forcibly sent back to the country of origin where they fear persecution. Some governments see the grant of asylum as a hostile act. You see a lot of toxic and polarized domestic debates about asylum, and so on and so forth. Then you also have various issues linked to poor reception conditions, lack of local integration support and services, and misinformation which lead to secondary influence. And these are complex challenges, not only for the individuals concerned, but also for governments. Now, if I'm speaking Greek, and you don't speak Greek, please feel free to put your hand up and ask me questions. You know, I would like this to be interactive, and if I'm only on my time, let me know as well. Now, having highlighted some of these issues, whether it's some of the harsh policies or restrictive measures that some countries have come up with because of threats to security, national security, threats to terrorism, political dialogues in the country or pressures. The question is, what can you and I do? And I like the chess analogy here. I noticed that in your theme, you talk about being the pawn that counts. So the question is, what can we do? I'd like to summarize them in 5 key points. You have them in the summarized PowerPoint presentation. The first thing that is prevention. We have to deal with the root causes of displacement. Now, this talks about conflict. How do you stop warring factions or warring parties from fighting? Indiscriminate violence. How do you promote human rights? How do you develop good governance? How do you have judicial mechanisms, investigative mechanisms to actually ensure that there is no impunity that goes on, so on and so forth. So prevention. The first thing that one needs to deal with is violations, addressing the issue of violations of human rights, threats to life, social equality, and injustice, and ensuring accountability for human rights abuses. Long-term development also is something that needs to be looked at. The second point is on ensuring protection in mixed movements. What happens in many countries is they try to deter irregular movements. I'm not saying that countries do not have a vested interest, a vested right or inherent right to ensure its territorial sovereignty, to ensure its national security, so on and so forth. But there is need to look more into issues linked to human mobility, non-criminalization of some of these acts, but actually trying to regularize. That was a big bit of a tongue twister. Regularize some of these situations and try to legalize such things. And we also need to have legal alternatives to irregular entries, because if you don't have, in the absence of an alternative, people will continue to come through irregular means and through dangerous precarious means. The third point, promote government ownership and capacity in asylum and protection systems. This is what we try to do. We try to support governments in different cases in building the asylum system. But in some locations you find that it becomes more and more complex and cumbersome and so difficult in order to get refugee status. And this is where we have to make sure that the hurdles do not get higher and higher, that unnecessary complexities, elaborate, cumbersome administrative and physical removal. Humane and dignified reception conditions are needed. There should be protection against arbitrary detention, and fair and efficient refugee status determination procedures are needed, along with actual enjoyment of rights, the one hand, and access to durable solutions. Are you still with me? Yeah? Any questions? Not yet. I know you're saving the best for the last. There is one question, yes.
The first point, prevention.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of refugees displaced by war, like the case of Syria, prevention seems to be, how should I say, out of the organization's hands, I think. So this is more of a matter for international, towards diplomacy and politics and or natural disasters. You can't really prevent
natural disasters is one thing, but in terms of preventable disasters or disasters which are man-made, that can be addressed, and it's not something that's in the mandate of one agency or one actor. It has to take a multitude of actors to participate. We can talk about pressures from individuals, from civil society, raising awareness. We can talk about increasing pressures by various governments. Of course, we talk about when it comes to matters of security. You have the Security Council mechanism, General Assembly resolutions that make and pronounce the recommendations. And then you have the whole range of humanitarian law, for example, in terms of the humanitarian principles that should be respected. So preventing the causes, we have to look at the root causes. Some things, yes, it seems insurmountable to deal with, but inaction is not the answer. People have to do something. And sitting and watching and hoping that it will disappear is not acceptable. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
I have one question though. Specifically about mature detection in mixed movements. Mixed movements meaning certain factions, certain
Right.
cultures.
Yeah, sorry, I should clarify. I was referring to mixed migration movements, and this includes irregular movements. Now, what often happens is that you have refugees moving alongside with others who are moving for purely economic reasons. And this becomes quite complex and difficult for governments in trying to identify who are persons in need of international protection and who are here simply because they're in search of better life, per se. And in that sense, there are various guidelines and rules that are, or principles, if you like, on how to identify persons in need of international protection, how to ensure that in combating illegal migration or irregular migration as well as transnational crime, that you do not compromise in terms of granting access to international protection for those in need. Promoting accountability, equality, and empowerment. And the last bit is solutions orientation throughout. Now, prevention. This is a little boy from South Sudan who had just arrived by train from Sudan during the referendum period. I like his smile. He survived. Apparently, not that he survived. Generally, most of the movements were fine, but there were some attacks along the way, so we were quite concerned about this particular train ride. Ensuring protection of mixed migration, mixed movements, we talked about this. This was a picture taken in Myanmar. No, Bangladesh. Okay, promoting government ownership, we talked about that. Okay, the fourth point. Promoting accountability, equality, and empowerment. It's important to promote gender equality, education, and empowerment in terms of livelihood, self-sufficiency, skills training. You would find that more often than not, these are little things that are ignored by some. And as a result of that, these are some of the reasons that cause displacement because of imbalances, and also reasons that make life extremely difficult for refugees to become self-reliant. This is a picture of a Rohingya family whose home I had visited. It's a bit dark, but you can't see three little heads above that wall where the cloth is hanging. Those are three young women. For cultural reasons, religious reasons, they are not allowed to come out. It's only the elderly lady who's out. I was there to talk about a sexual and gender-based violence incident, but it was the men who talked to me, not the women. Now, in a place like that, one of the things that we had to work very hard on was to try to somehow promote gender equality. And it's not something that you see happening overnight. it takes years. And child education, that particular location, we try to promote girl child education because in many cultures you will find that boy child education is promoted against over the girl child education. And then this, you'll find that the disparity, the dynamics in terms of gender equality start right at a very, very young age. Skills training, livelihood, without that you can't be self-sufficient. You become dependent, and you become, dependency is not not a problem per se, but you become vulnerable. The last slide is on the fifth point, on what we can do, is to ensure a solutions orientation throughout. What does that mean? It doesn't sound right in English, but the focus should be solutions. What solutions can we find? We're not looking at just the immediacy of having to provide assistance and to meet a humanitarian need, but in the longer term, how can we find a durable solution for this population? Voluntary repatriation is one example. Many refugees just want to go home. And when they want to go home, they want to go home to a place where they live most of their life. This picture is again in South Sudan, and during the referendum there were displacements, and people were afraid, those who were in North and Sudan were afraid of becoming stateless and becoming refugees. At that time there were still internal displacements, so they were fleeing. We had thousands coming per day. And so you have, this is as an example of some of the challenges faced, but they wanted to voluntarily, and they did voluntarily return home. But there's so many obstacles to return. And I remember in some countries, like in Tanzania, where I worked, as well as in Uganda, where we had people who wanted to voluntarily repatriate home, refugees. But they couldn't go home for various reasons, because things were not there in place. They couldn't get the assistance they needed, no housing. It would have led to secondary displacement, and so on and so forth. And I remember, specifically, vividly remember several people who were very elderly and aged or with serious medical conditions, who said, listen, I just want to go home and die in my home, not in a foreign country. And you can try to tell them, listen, things are not good, it's bad, but all they want to do is go home. So sometimes there is this perception that no, they want to live in another country, but not really, not really. Local integration, that is another solution. If they come to a country of asylum and they are granted refugee status, then this is where help is needed to help them locally integrate in that country. And resettlement to a third country that could be supported. But we also need to explore new approaches. Labor mobility, as I mentioned, temporary migration, alternative forms of legal stay, particularly for those in protected situations. I end the presentation on refugees, and before I move on to statelessness, are there any questions or comments even?
I noticed that the definition of refugee states one person is a refugee for political reasons, gender, race, religion, so on and so forth. What about sexuality? I've met a Russian and I've heard of some other Russians that have recently fled Russia because of the new homophobia. Are they considered refugees?
They may be considered refugees. I wouldn't give a conclusive answer to any particular case, because we usually have to look at the circumstances. LGBTI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. Now, many of the persons who fall within this group, due to their sexual orientation and so on, and gender identity, do face persecution in their country. It depends. We need to look at it. Like in Russia, I know the law criminalizes it. I was in Uganda when it was criminalized while I was there. The criminalization of a sexual orientation per se does not necessarily mean that they're persecuted. So we have to go into the individual circumstances and the general situation in the country as well on how they are treated. Because in some countries it may be criminalized, but it's tolerated, it's accepted. And it's fine. I've been in some countries where it's accepted. You're not being persecuted, where there's a threat to your life, to your freedom, so on and so forth. So in that sense, yes, that would usually fall under the ground of membership of a particular social group. It's a convention ground. In some situations, it can be for other reasons as well. We treat a political opinion, depending on how it's perceived.
The particular rationale in that, like even in the sexuality, so I know it's already considered a political side in the United States.
Thank you for that intervention. It all depends on the individual facts and circumstances as well as the objective situation in the country. So legislative criminalization of certain acts per se is indicative of some violations or compromises, limitations on certain rights. But we need to look more in terms of the actual practice in the country as well. Okay, so moving on. Yes, sir. It really depends on which country they're in, because I can't remember the specific name of the case, but the European Court of Human Rights recently made a pronouncement, and maybe here you could help me, where it's not necessary for the individual to have to conceal their sexual orientation, so on and so forth, in order to avoid persecution. Does that mean that they will have an unhealthy life if they can still practice it but not have persecution? It's different because it's like the issue of discrimination. Discrimination exists in so many countries, but does the discrimination reach to the threshold of persecution? So that's always the question. The fact that somebody's rights may be limited and restricted per se does not necessarily rise to the threshold of persecution, but in some cases it does. Yeah. So it's based on the individual facts, the subjective element, as well as what we call the objective element, the situation in a particular country. Yeah. I hope I'm not getting too technical here.
And just one thing, if you allow me, we have a case about the fact that you just asked. I don't have the name in mind of the case that you mentioned from the European Court of Human Rights decision, but we have positive jurisprudence in the north part of Romania, the north part of the country, that the tribunal from Suceava granted a form of protection, subsidiary protection, which is like rights equal with refugee status to one from Cameroon 3 or 4 years ago, and was considered for that case the most positive practice at this level that we have in Romania. If we keep in mind the fact that Romania 10 years ago and 7 years ago were Romanians gay who received a form of protection on the Dutch territory in Holland. So when I explained this to ECRES, the European Council on Refugees and Exiles, they said to me, well, it would be considered indeed a practice because till that decision, we didn't have any positive decision on this fact. And what I cannot, I can't say how it motivated the decision. I'm just a simple legal counselor, assisting people in the asylum procedure, but the level of the things that were invoked and explained by that judge in that decision, indeed were makes you be impressed. And like changing opinion in a former Soviet country, which were, and in some areas still in Romania, the gay community treated, like you said, in the Russian side. Now, I think this could be considered also challenging from the national perspective. Turning to the national perspective from the international view that you presented already. So
Thank you. So, if we have no further questions on refugees at this point of time, perhaps we can move to issues linked to statelessness. Perhaps we could start with the video presentation to just sort of set a tone to the discussion and set a backdrop to the discussion. I also have to say, while waiting, that I'm quite impressed, actually very impressed, that the forum chose to talk about statelessness as well. Because statelessness is quite often something that's invisible, not only in terms of the individuals themselves, but it's something that's not talked much about. You don't hear much about. We've started a campaign now trying to raise awareness about it. So I'm really glad that it was included in this topic. Thank you. Yeah.
Imagine being born you can't prove it. You want to learn, there's no school. You want to be useful, but aren't allowed to work. When you're sick, the doctor ignores you. When you fall in love, they won't come. You don't have children. For fear they're not going to visit you. You are sure you're huge. You have no human life. When you die, there is no proof you ever existed. Every 10 minutes, a person like this is born. 10 million people in the world are stateless. They have no nationality and are told they don't belong anywhere. But everyone has the right to nationality. Everyone has the right to say, I belong.
Did you know that Albert Einstein was a refugee? Did you know that he was not only a refugee, but he was also stateless between 1896 to 1901? Apparently, it was because of an act of his own act. He decided to renounce his German nationality on his own accord. But in 1901, he was granted Swiss citizenship or nationality, and therefore it was a happy ending in that sense. But I just tell you the profile and the contributions that can be made by refugees and stateless persons. So what is a stateless person? A stateless person is someone who has no nationality, no legal born in country or state by operation of the law of any state. Not the state they come from, or where they resided, habitually resided in, or by any other country. Now, for the purposes of the discussion, I'll just use the word statelessness or stateless persons. But when we talk about statelessness, the problem is wider. We talk about people who are at risk of statelessness, and we talk about people who have undeterminate nationality. They all have similar challenges, fall within a similar group. Now, when I started off, I mentioned that the indicative statistics that we have show that there are about 10 million stateless persons in the world. But we actually believe that the number is much higher. That's because there has not been much visibility about the problem, no proper identification of people who are stateless. And things have improved now over the past few years compared to some 50, 60 years ago. But still, there's lots that need to be done. Now, what does it mean to be stateless? I can tell you from some experiences that I've seen myself. When I worked in Myanmar, I worked in what we call the Northern Rakhine State. Sorry, a location called Northern Rakhine State, which is a rather remote area bordering Bangladesh and Myanmar. And there were about some 700,000 Rohingya. Now, the term Rohingya cannot be used in Myanmar because it's not recognized by the government. And so this ethnic group are referred to as Bengali or Muslims as an ethnicity. Now, as far as I know, Islam is a religion, not an ethnicity. But while we were there, that was how they were referred to as Muslims. Bengali, the term Bengali implied that they were from Bangladesh. Now, the problem with that is that Bangladesh also did not recognize them as nationals from the country. But there was some shared cultural backgrounds or in history, religion, language, so on and so forth between both communities on both sides of the border. What did it mean to be a stateless person or Muslim in northern Afghan state? Significant challenges. You can't move from one village to another village down the road, even if it's just right at that end of the road, unless you have permission from the local authority. In order to get married, they had to get permission to get married, and permissions would be granted after 1 year or so in most cases. And that required scrutiny of whether they were registered as residents there or not. Not residents, but some sort of a temporary residence. Now you have people who've lived their whole lives there and are descendants of several generations, but they have no nationality, no documents. Now if you violate certain laws, you get struck off the list and you do not exist. If you are married or you have a child without authorization, your child is considered a blacklisted child, and your child is not registered in any list that they have for every family. There were severe restrictions in terms of everything: where you live, who lives in your home, jobs, what education you can have, where you can move for various reasons. Now, there were several reasons given by the authorities there, but the reality is life, when you look at it in terms of the cumulative discrimination, was persecution. And the challenge for these people is that they do not exist. They don't have basic rights like you and I. And so what this means is that access to education, healthcare, family, right to family, even dignity in terms of death, being issued a death certificate or a burial, are all affected. Now, there are many metaphors used to refer to what we call stateless persons. Shadows, you see maybe in one video on our site. Invisible. A void, a gap, unrecognized. All of this expresses a certain situation of emptiness, void, a gap, no doubt. But it doesn't describe the anguish, challenges that are faced on a day-to-day basis. And for that reason, we have to find solutions. How do we deal with this phenomenon in the interest of equality, justice, and human dignity? Now, to give you a face to the problem, perhaps we can take the next video. It's about a woman called Leah, who is stateless in Lebanon. Yes. Yeah, well,
I'm just curious, if this person, I mean, old one, if she doesn't exist, how she can get a job if the government doesn't allow her to exist, to have rights and to recognize her with paperwork and so on and so forth. What can she do, or yes, what can she do to get those rights? She goes to another country, or what is the solution?
That's the thing. For many of them, there is no solution.
They just die?
They just exist, and they live under severe hardship, severe situations. Now, there are different things that are being done, even in Myanmar, for example, or Bangladesh, to try to address some of the situations, some of these issues, but it's a long way. And you'll find that in many situations of statelessness, now I'm giving you different examples, that people simply exist. And they try to find ways to live and survive, but with much difficulty. So What happens is they become extremely vulnerable to smugglers, to human traffickers. When it comes to work, they end up working in the black market, or and where they're often exploited. You don't get to go to school, or if you go to school, like in some parts or in some countries I've seen, they have to pay huge amounts of bribes, or they have to come up with false documentation. And you drive people into illegality, you drive people into the hands of criminals. So it is a very tough life for most.
But there are some organizations that just handle the situation. I mean, they just try to make some documents for them, or I don't know.
Here's the challenge. Nationality, citizenship, is the prerogative of the state. So it's a government, it's a country that gives you nationality. The UN cannot give nationality, an NGO cannot give nationality. It's a legal bond between a state and an individual. So you can give whatever documentation you want to these individuals, but unless it is recognized, unless it's accepted, unless it carries some weight somewhere, it means nothing. So there are some real challenges. Of course, there are various associations and groups that are trying to raise more and more awareness on this issue. Now you have the European Statelessness Network. You can check their sites. There's some video links that tell you about their work and what they try to do. And the main thing is to try to get governments to accede to some of the conventions in statelessness, try to identify these individuals, to protect them, reduce situation of statelessness, so on and so forth. But it's a long way. But be optimistic. Thank you.
Leanne is sleepless. She lives without and without documents. Her status is known in Lebanon as Maktoum Code. أنا عارف بالنسبة للهوية. أنا كنت صغيرة إنه ما بعرف إنه بس الهوية ما بعرف إنه المشكلة الكبيرة بس وعيت على الهوية أنا كنت أعرف أكيد بالعمر 12 سنة كنت أعرف إنه ما بعرف الهوية. Leanne's grandfather was Lebanese, but did not register the birth of Leanne's father. As Leanne's father was not registered, he in turn could not register the birth of Leanne and her 6 siblings. ما تقدر إنه هي تطلع على الحال إلا ما يكون مثلا بي معه إنه بابا إنه ما كان معه هوية والبنات ما كان معه هوية ولما ماما اشتغل كان عم تشتغل هي طلعت الهوية وقالت محامي قضت فترة في 5 سنين لطلع هوية للبابا وبس طلعت هويته كمان ما قدرنا يسجلوا يطلعوا Leanne is married to a Lebanese man. Since she doesn't have any papers, the marriage could not be registered. As the marriage is not registered, she could not register the birth of her children. They too are stateless.
عندي ولدين طفلين واحد عنده 10 والثاني عنده 5 كمان عم بيعاني مشكلة السجن.
Leanne has lived this way for nearly 30 years. To change her status and that of her children, Leanne needs to go to court, but she's caught in a vicious cycle. Without papers, she cannot work legally, and she cannot afford lawyers.
تزوجت وصار عندي ولاد ما بقدر أسجلهم للأسف وما بقدر أسافر بدي أتوظف ما بقدر بأدخل مستشفى كمان ما بقدر حالة صحية إنه ما فيني أنا أدخل مستشفى كمان أنا بتأثر كثير بالهوية.
Leanne is currently unwell and is in desperate need of a kidney operation.
يعني ما بقدر أدخل مستشفى لأنه هويتي كثير بتوجعني لكن هيك بتأثر فيا مع إنه ولا كثير خطير يعني الأيام كده صعب.
She never went to school. That too was inaccessible to her.
ممكن أنا عشان من حياتنا أصلا أتوظف وظيفة إنه عندي هذا ما بقدر يعني كذا.
With financial help from aid agencies, Leanne's two boys are able to go to school. But when the help stops, so will their education.
أنا أولادي نتمنى أن يكونوا أحسن مني ويوصلوا لشيء إنه منيح. أحب إنه يعمل أولادي إنه يوصلوا للجامعة طبعا.
UNHCR and its partners are working with authorities to raise awareness of the importance of birth registration in Lebanon, to assist stateless people of Lebanese origins to confirm their nationality. The struggle here is to find a way to ensure that Leanne, her children, and thousands of other stateless people can live normal and productive lives.
I will just sum up on the 3 key points on what we can do when we come back to this question again about being the pawns. What can we do? First, the ethical imperative and human suffering. We have a man-made problem because statelessness is something that's created because of gaps in nationality laws, changes in boundaries, administrative practices, so on and so forth. These things can be changed. So therefore, there is the ethical imperative to end human suffering by actually doing something about this. It can be dealt with. The second issue, or the second point that can be done is the rule of law imperative. We have to push for governments to fulfill their legal obligations. You have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that talks about the right to nationality. In Europe, you have the European Convention of Nationality that codifies this right. And you have a range of other conventions, the 54 Convention, 1954 Convention on the status of stateless persons, 61 Convention on reduction of statelessness, the Rights of the Child Convention, various conventions on discrimination against eliminating discrimination against women, all forms of racial discrimination as well, so on and so forth. So we have the legal basis, the judicial decisions as well that have been used to ensure that the governments fulfill their legal obligations. The third point that we can work on is development and peace building, trying to have sustainable, secure, sustainable societies. The example in Myanmar is one. I was there when the conflict erupted in 2012 June. And the one thing that I keep remembering is what one of my colleagues had worked there for many, many years. He was from an NGO, and he said, we have gone back light years behind. So much work was put to try to promote reconciliation between the different ethnic groups. But because of this, the conflict, we went back light years. Back, not forward. So much damage was done in the social fabric in terms of the trust between ethnic groups and in terms of development, so on and so forth. Therefore, it's very important to deal with this issue. Côte d'Ivoire is another example. Again, I won't go into details, but there have been some positive changes there in its nationality legislation, which contribute to reconciliation and social cohesion. To conclude, yay. I'd like to end with your theme. We talked about the challenges for refugees and stateless persons and for governments as well. We talked about the 5 broad areas that we can work on for refugee protection, the 3 imperatives in terms of statelessness. There's a lot you and I can do to raise awareness, change perceptions, and be agents of influence for change. So I would like to appeal to you to be the point that counts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for the beautiful letter. As you saw, there are numerous aspects, dramatic aspects on the issue at hand. It's useless to come back and mention them. You felt them, words cannot express what was discussed here. So I will further give the word to our next speaker, Partea, who will enjoy us with presentation.
So first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, and thank you also, Laura, for because she covered everything that could be technical speaking in refugee statelessness, asylum seeker, less, but the rest is already covered. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and to, unfortunately, we don't have time to make like a round table to know which is your name, to, how should I say, to have a direct relation with you in the communication. Yes, why not? I think the part that I'm in charge with is not the refugee assistance, but it's about the persons who are asylum seekers in Romania with the temporary status, linked in a way with the mixed migration flows, in which sometimes the Romanian state, at the administrative level or in front of the courts, decides that they are not refugees in the convention meaning, but just migrants, economically migrants, or not only, with other interests than just to receive a form of protection in order to remain in Romania or in other European states for any other reason. So unfortunately, they are rejected. In my daily job, I'm in charge with the assistance of these cases, not like legal representation in front of the court, because we are managing with the lawyers that are assisting them, but we are assisting with things that are in the procedure, like motivation of the appeals and second appeals, which in English is difficult to translate, like we call in Romanian recurs for the ones that are students at the law university, and you know what I want to say, what I'm referring to. And also with the counseling and with the assistant during the interview at the first stage of the ERIC procedure, which is called Refugee Status Determination Procedure, and has the first step, the procedure starts at the first step with the interview. But first of all, maybe I have just 5 slides, sharp and clear, with the organization, with the Romanian National Council for Refugees, what we are dealing with, and which is the short history of the organization. Now, and in the last, I think, 12 or 13 years, I hope I'm not wrong, UNHCR gives the honor to our organization to offer projects. So my organization is one of the IPs, implementing partners, that are working on the project financed by UNHCR. Previously, we had a project on counseling for these asylum seekers with the temporary protection. And it's funny because if you are going to ask them during the counseling, and the first glance when you see that person, and you ask, which is your status? They will say, I'm a refugee. Even so for him, yes, I'm a refugee in front of the authorities, and in front of the court, and in front of the legal counselors, and UNHCR is just an asylum seeker with a temporary status until a final and irrevocable decision is going to be pronounced. So I hope it's not so technical or Greek language like what I said, but it's the reality of the views linked with the migration flows that unfortunately sometimes our perception or their perception about their own problems is going to be a little bit different than the official perception based on the convention and laws. And what I want to say and impress me is that there is a theory of law professor, Canadian, his name is Hathaway, who said that we cannot consider that a person is economical migrant if you are speaking about countries in which you should survive with only small bread. And he was famous because his classical example was North Korea. So you cannot say that a person coming from North Korea is going to be just because he's not allowed, like in the last years in Ceausescu's time, is not allowed to buy food for his family because it's just no food or limited food from the perspective of the government. So being compelled just to eat one small slice of bread because this is the decision of the government or something like this. And you cannot say that that guy is going to be an economical migrant anyway. Because it's obviously that it's inhuman treatment, even the simple way of being there, try to live a normal day-to-day life. But this is just an extreme, if I should say, example. In other cases, of course, they are going to be these economical migrants. I think I should ask. Just put it, and I'm going to guide him where to go. If you have any questions, I just said that maybe you can. My name is Andrea. Your name is. Okay. Octavian. Tavi sounds so in English, Octavian. Andra, it's nice, interesting. It's like Italian representative from Raimundo. Okay, I want to say also that go to the first, go up. To the first one, I cannot see here. No. Erfurt should be something with Erfurt starting. No, maybe I should come closer 1 minute.
Nu, du-te mai sus, dar nu intra în el. Uite aici, eu văd, Erfurt 2011. Da. Așa. Studenți generarea PowerPoint.
Excellent point. For many, they have no recall.
Nu, asta închide. Mai trebuie să fie un prezentare generală.
What
okay.
usually happens is, no, they still do get, do get, no, what's the word? They are subjected to the criminal procedures because the person, regardless of your identity and the legality of your stay on a territory. And actually what usually happens is even if they've not committed a crime, the mere fact that you're undocumented or you have no legal residence or stay or so on, or you don't exist as such, often results in them being more prone to being subjected to arbitrary detention.
How do they register their detentions if they don't have any idea to register?
Criminal law. Criminal law works that way.
No, please.
I want to ask, can this is a situation with more like the last video, with more people that are in this situation? Why don't we take the method to test and like if someone would seen that and shared it on the internet now in Europe, it could have been, or it can be a viable thing like it happened when the, let's say, war Ukraine thing, propaganda happened with some girl that was saying, I cannot leave the country, I'm here, I'm scared, and things like that. It was really viral on the internet. Can they not do something like this?
In some countries, it might be possible for people to be able to voice out the problems they have. Some other countries, they only expose themselves to more harm, which is one reason why they tend to remain in hiding or remain invisible. Many people even if they know of the problem, they have no solution, so they don't see any real solution to the problem. So this is why we are having a campaign, precisely for the reasons that you said. UNHCR launched a campaign last November to end statelessness in 10 years' time. And through that, some of the videos we saw were done with benefit to raise awareness on the plight of stateless persons, to approach governments to identify such persons, to actually map out such cases and to find solutions for them. So it's happening through different networks. You've seen some of the European Statelessness Network. I also saw on your site you have several links as well to different institutions that are trying to raise awareness. And you can contribute to that too. Thank you.
Now if I should continue to be shorter, sure, no problem. But it's good, if you have any other questions, just feel free, because the presentation I can make it more with short cases from the level, from the national practice. So just feel free to speak out if you need to ask something, me or her, anytime. The presentation is going to be on, it's written in Romanian, but it's just a short presentation in the first slide that the foundation started the activity in 1998, was financed by UNHCR and was the main partner of UNHCR, implementing partner in that time, regarding the counseling provided to asylum seekers, as previously I said, and also border monitoring, and was in charge also with the integration. And now the present project that CaleaEuropeana.ro, the short name of the foundation, is implementing based on UNHCR project, is also on integration. I'm not working on the project of UNHCR, I'm working on the European project called ERF, European Refugee Fund. But I have colleagues, like I like to say, to the integration department, which are in charge on UNHCR project with this. In 2003, CaleaEuropeana became a public utility foundation, and implemented also legal assistance and counseling for the cases that were in detention in the public custody centers, which are two in Romania, for the asylum seekers that were not, as I said, considered refugees, so the person that did not receive any form of protection in Romania and became illegal immigrants, and from that moment they refused or they couldn't leave Romania legally, so the authorities brought them in the detention centers. The detention are not called detention centers, are called public custody centers. Is one in Arad, or near Arad, and one in Otopen, near Bucharest. This is a short presentation with our mission and with the object, with the main issues that we addressed during this time. There were three departments, legal one, social one, and medical one. The social and the medical one were financed by UNHCR entirely until the moment in which in Romania was a law on the asylum issues, in which the government is the one in charge with the medical assistance, and also with the social counseling and so on. Unfortunately, if I should say it, the social component is important. Even we speak about persons with temporary protection, like the one who receive security protection, and most of the Syrians in Romania now, more than 1,000 received security protection. And there are also cases in which, for Syrians, in which Romania was granted them the refugee status. Also, there is a little bit a change in the views of the rights that a person has in order to travel free in the other countries of Europe. And in our day-to-day work, we have many problems with the Syrians that cannot leave Romania with security protection without a type of visa on the documents from countries like Germany, Dutch, Norway, Sweden, and so on. and they all are starting to ask also in front of the authorities, why only if I have the refugee status I have the right to travel normally, if I should say, and if I have the subsidiary protection, I cannot, because in the law in our company we explain that the rights are the same, but the reasons for receiving subsidiary protection or refugee status are different. And then it's a little bit challenging to explain why this decision at the European level. And fortunately, or it's not unfortunately, the state sovereignty is going to decide, even for us, the normal citizens, if we are going to be received on that territory or not. As I receive an explanation from the Romanian border police, that to do not be surprised if in an airport, when they are going to check me, they can say, the border police from that moment, that can say that, oh, okay, if I want, I cannot allow you to enter on that territory or not. Yeah, and I was surprised to find out that, yeah, without any other explanation. Of course, maybe if you are going to ask the reasons officially, maybe they are going to explain to you, because it's a human right, if you ask me from my perspective and from my work. But this is a long story, if I should say. So this is it. We have a link also with the volunteers, and we have a legal law clinic with University of Bucharest, with the law school. And I'm very pleased if you want to offer as volunteer in our work to work with my colleagues that are in charge with the integration of refugees, or with us, just anytime you can contact us and you have their details. Now returning to the cases, if I should say, I tried to underline some small things which I have in mind with the cases that I was assisting during the 12 years in Romania. So few of the notions that I have here, it was very interesting for me regarding the statelessness thing that was mentioned by Lorette, how is the real life of Rohingya people in Bangladesh. And unfortunately, I'm assisting a case, and I drafted 1 month ago motivation in order to receive access to a new asylum procedure, a person that is that stated that is Rohingya. And during the interview at the administrative level, he said that he mentioned that he's Rohingya, and unfortunately the interpreter, who was a guy from Bangladesh, refused, it seems that refused to translate that he's Rohingya, and it's logical in a way. In front of the court, the asylum seeker decided to request the judge an interpreter who is speaking Urdu and is from Pakistan, in order everything to be okay for him. But at the first stage, he said that, so he knew that he had the right to refuse the interpreter, but unfortunately he was too afraid of. Now it was, he didn't receive even the access to an asylum procedure, even we tried to explain only with country origin information, which is the situation. And in Romania, as I know, in 12 years, it's the first case that we assisted in general with Rohingya origin. And Rohingya is considered, I mean, as I know, it's one of the most destitute people, like community with the origin in Bangladesh, as already Lorette mentioned, in Myanmar. But unfortunately, I don't know if this was clear also for the eligibility officer or for the judges that were in the asylum procedure. The official position of Immigration Office, Directorate of Asylum and Integration, in the decision was that why he didn't mention this at the first interview, why he realized that he's Rohingya during the procedure in front of the court. Now it's very difficult to establish the credibility of the case, but I think that indeed if the interpreter, and I know the interpreter who he was, and indeed has Bengali origin, it's like 50 and 50%. So I refuse to think in a way that he did not mention that he's Rohingya, or maybe indeed he was afraid to mention in front of that guy that he's Rohingya. So it's I'm curious what is going to be in front of the court of the first court in the special procedure of access to asylum procedure, how it's called in the asylum law. The decision of the first court is going to be the last one and irrevocable. So we cannot appeal the decision to go to the tribunal, and maybe we are going to see which is the solution for him. Hope that the toleration status, which is on the aliens law, is not going to be the final result for him, at least to not be returned to his country. Because indeed what he described, he suffered there with his family when he was 6 years old, is terrifying, like forms of daily humiliation. So this is one case that I have in mind regarding Rohingya, as I mentioned already, about the ecological refugees and the prevention, the concept of prevention. I'm sorry I didn't keep in mind your name, but anyway, it was a very nice question. We have, in 2006, I think, when tsunami came, a Sri Lanka refugee, asylum seeker, who was finally rejected, the case in Romania, by the both courts, because it was considered that the ecological refugees are not in the doctrine, in the asylum international doctrine, considered in, yeah, and based on the convention, he cannot be considered, unfortunately, one of the reasons to be applied, and strictly not based on the law, he could not receive a formal protection.
That doesn't make sense.
I need to clarify though, the term refugees sometimes is used very loosely to refer to persons who are displaced due to natural disasters. In a colloquial general sense, yes, we are seeking refuge somewhere else, but they are not refugees in terms of those fleeing persecution, nor those who are subjected to who are fleeing or who are serious risk of suffering indiscriminate violence, generalized violence, so on and so forth. So I just want to make that distinction. Thanks. But you do find a lot of them becoming internally displaced because of natural disasters, so on and so forth. Refugees, the term refugees does not cover, the legal definition, if you like, does not cover the situation. They require some other form of protection or assistance, if you like, humanitarian assistance, but they're not refugees per se. Thanks.
And this was also the motivation of the both courts, exactly like you already mentioned, almost word by word. So unfortunately for him, as I know, before to have the final decision at the tribunal, before the tribunal, he disappeared from Romania. So probably he crossed illegally the border, because most of the cases in Romania are ending like this. And we don't have time here to speak about the Dublin Convention, but some of them are returned to Romania in order to continue the procedure, the asylum procedure, if this is the case. If not, they disappear and maybe they apply for asylum in other countries. In countries, we don't know the results. The idea is that I received last week an email from Denmark, from the Danish Refugee Council, asking about the Romanian reception conditions, because they have a huge number of asylum seekers who left Romania, explaining that they cannot live in Romania. So unfortunately, we cannot be considered as experts. I mean, a legal counselor or social counselor just working in Romania cannot be considered an expert in order to make an evaluation of the reception conditions in Romania, so we cannot give an input. Yes, we just recommend some methodological norms, which are also in English translated, so, and the asylum law, of course. Then they can pick up the conclusion, in a way. Most of the cases are ending, I mean, are deciding to leave Romania just because the social aspect, the monthly allowance, is terrible. To survive in Romania as an asylum seeker with a temporary status with 20, around 20 euros per month, so it's almost impossible. And this is mentioned in the law, so this is the power of the Romanian state. They try to increase the allowance, but unfortunately,
It's almost as big as the allowance for children.
no, it's bigger, exactly.
Yes.
And don't oppose me this because usually the government says that, yeah, look, for children we have this money, but you cannot compare the both situation of the person.
I don't know if the social issue for refugees in Romania is only on a financial standpoint. On social, we are here a bunch of highly educated young people, okay, but you know, in Romania there are a lot of not only young, but I don't know, middle-aged persons who don't really see too good foreign people. Once I was in the RPD, 350, it starts here at Partea.
Yeah.
Square. I don't know how it is, but in Japanese. And in 350, you have those three seats with the Mercedes. You have the Mercedes, you have the great movers. And in the middle, an old man, Chantieri.
No, Shanti,
Yeah,
we are
worker.
building, yeah.
Kind of construction workers after the field. You see in the middle seat, okay? In the left side of him, no, right side, young Asian girl, took seat, take it. And in the left side of him is an African boy. I don't know.
Mixed,
Yes.
mixed
And he was
migration clothes.
really uncomfortable. I was watching him and he was and he walked away, you know, from that seat and he stood in another place. I don't know if they were refugees. I don't know. I don't think they were. I think they were students.
There are many people
But
from
maybe,
Philippines who are asylum seekers,
maybe
and also
the
Chinese.
problem here is not only at a financial standpoint, but at a social standpoint from this issue, from the lack of tolerance of the Romanian.
I think in Romania, if you ask me, and if I can speak free, I think we don't have a problem with the tolerance, like Islamophobia, and like in Germany or in other countries, in Hungary, like I heard from my colleagues. But we have another problem which is bigger than this. It is called ignorance. And hurt. I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
Ignorance is another word for lack of tolerance.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it was something that we've been asking ourselves as well. And there were surveys that were done by the Commission to try to understand how Romanians view uh, refugees. And it was quite interesting. I can't remember the name of the organization that was contracted to do it in the region, not just in Romania. Romania fared quite well. Apparently, Romanians, at least from the survey, which is a sampling of the population, kind of viewed it quite openly in terms of having foreigners. But yes, I think what you say is there are people who are not used to the fact of having differences, so different people who look very different or come from different origins. Certain groups have mentioned here and there in my interactions that sometimes people are not comfortable with them because of their skin color or their appearance, so on and so forth. But it's not like what you see in some other countries where there's outright xenophobia against refugees or foreigners. This actually is quite a positive point in Romania. There are some issues, but it's not at that level.
Yes, I was, now I remember that I'm also a journalist in sports and basketball, okay, so I took some interviews from some girls that play for, I believe that they are American girls, they are African American by
Looking.
from race, if I don't know. And I asked them, how do you feel in Romania? Do you like it? Yes, it's a beautiful country, but sometimes, you know, when I'm in the bus, all people stare at me, and I don't know why they're staring. And so,
Yeah, I think that's how us feeling in our country. I mean, I was in Italy and everyone asked me what nationality I am because they wanted to know how they would treat me. So I was, why do you want to know?
And I hope you didn't say the truth.
in Italy. Okay, I mean,
It doesn't matter because I'm just human as he or she is. So that's all that they need to know. And it was, okay, but what country are you? In a habit so nice. You are beautiful, that's okay, but it doesn't matter.
With good heart,
Yeah, no.
I mean,
yeah, I think for us in Romania, it's not the migrants, the number of migrants, not only asylum seekers, refugees, the workers that are here. The migrants, the number of migrants is not so huge, and with an impact in the social life, like in other European countries. And maybe it's normal like perception, and like if you think historically speaking that Romania 20 years ago was a country with closed borders, so nobody was out, nobody was in, only with few exceptions if the security allowed it. So maybe we do not forget about the people with the ages that are in the middle age, like you mentioned. So it's, in a way, it's normal. And I think 25 years is not enough for changing mentality. It's nothing, maybe. And still, some preconceptions is normal to be observed in the society. But this is your role to make something to be changed. And the fact that you are here and you know what it's about and you know the definition of the refugees and all the other things and the information that you receive, it makes the percentage to be higher in the optical, in the views, in the way it's changing this. So this could be a good point, yes.
Why do refugees, potential refugees and migrants choose Romania in the first place? You mentioned Syria and Sri Lanka. They're pretty far away from Romania.
Yeah, unfortunately, Romania is still a transit country because we are not in Schengen, and due to the economical problems and the level of life in Romania, we are not targeted countries like other countries from the West. Unfortunately, this is our reality. Maybe they think that when we are going with Bulgaria to join Schengen, the reality is going to be a little bit changed. Unfortunately, or I don't know how I should say, we are just a transit country because I think this is the economical and the social impact. This is the reality. And the countries that you mentioned, usually the smugglers were lying them that here on Harris Road, one guy from Pakistan told me that the smuggler told him, look, here is Munich. And was not the Munich from Germany. He was just Harris Road in Bucharest. And he was almost shocked, like, how it's not Germany? No, it's not Germany. And the authorities from immigration tried to explain to him, no, I should register you. Because unfortunately, you are in Romania, it's not Germany. So it's a tragedy if you think that one was telling me that in order to pass illegally the border, they travel to Moscow legally because they do not need visa, and from Moscow to Romania, they pass illegally the border. 6 years ago, I think, was the case, and told me that the entire little village gave him money in order to arrive in Europe and to work here and to send money back to the entire village and to help also them. So it's indeed a tragedy, I should say. Maybe that's why also they are still being in the asylum procedure, they dream to go to the West and not to remain in Romania. We don't have closed centers, only for illegal migrants that I mentioned already to you. So in Romania, the centers in the asylum procedure and the centers for refugees are open centers. Because in other countries like Hungary, for instance, and even in Holland, I know that depending if you apply for asylum on the airport, you are going to be put in a closed center. If you go directly to the police station or in other parts, you are going to be free on the Dutch territory. So the policy in Europe is a little bit different, depending on the area.
I think it's a mixed bag of reasons. Syrians, for example, are hosted in large numbers in their neighboring countries, but you also know that there are very severe limitations in those countries. For example, Turkey, it has a geographical limitation in terms of who it recognizes as refugees. So it only recognizes those who are from Europe. They can then stay and remain in Turkey and be able to access certain rights. Whereas if you're a non-European, you don't have those rights. And this is the reason why people may still be able to survive to an extent in Turkey, but there are many others who will choose to move onwards in search of a better life for their families, for themselves. If they are unable to find any other means of getting a better life. And the closest you will have would be Bulgaria. And in Bulgaria, as you know, last year there was a huge number of asylum applications, and the asylum system had faced serious challenges along with its reception conditions. And so from there on, we have onward movement. Now, to an extent, yes, many of the countries in this region are seen as transit countries, but you also have other challenges. Even those who do wish to remain in the country find problems linked to the assistance that they receive, the access to employment. Many Romanians themselves are moving westwards in search of jobs in order to be able to support their families, so on and so forth. So you'll find that the general economic situation that affects Romanian citizens alike also affect, and sometimes more so, these groups because they don't have the same community support and network or family situation. So I'm not saying it's all black and white. There's also a lot of issues, concerns about misinformation. The grass is greener in Western Europe. It's the land flowing with milk and honey, so on and so forth. So you have a lot of those things as well. But there are a range of factors, so I wouldn't just say it's just one single sole factor in the absence of evidence to the contrary.
You mentioned that someone comes to the minimum of good living and something like that. They were finished or like they had no idea how to write or read.
In the cases that I met, I have cases from people who could not sign on their documents or on the appeal. They just put finger, so they were illiterate. To people that were in that applied for asylum and became refugees were diplomats. So you cannot say that the refugees are illiterate. For last case that I assisted during the interview was a diplomat from Sudan, a woman. It's an interesting case. Okay, and no names.
In the video, like I was referring to a lot of people, because I was thinking about people like from that video they actually don't get traffic. I was thinking about them. Like,
You are thinking about, now you are asking about what was in the field that you had presented with the Lebanese, with the Syrians in Lebanon?
I just confused them. I was thinking they were trying as well to they can have answers. But going back to actually
Current
the
presentation.
I was thinking that a lot of them, they don't go to school, and not all of them get probably to get a bit of education programs that try to help them. They don't actually get also to have some studies like they get to, let's say, after high school to university, or I imagine like primary school you could get people there, but university I imagine it's quite hard to get.
It really depends. As Andrea mentioned, you can have people who are very well educated professionals who apply for refugee status, who are refugees, and you also have those who are not highly educated and don't have certain skills. So it really depends on the individual. But it is a real challenge, for example, when you have people who have who don't have the skills that are recognized here, or have skills which are not recognized because they don't have the necessary documentation. Usually when people flee, they don't run along with my high school certificate, along with my my employer's recommendation letter. So you have a lot of people who don't have documents sometimes that confirm their educational background and employment status. And then it becomes difficult for places like Europe, in areas like Europe, for it to be recognized. So there are all the other issues linked to that as well. So even if you do have the necessary educational background and work experience, sometimes that remains a challenge. And of course, there are those who don't have that as well. As in, who don't have the skills or education for various reasons. I just have one last thing to answer to the question earlier about refugees. In Africa, the definitions, when we talk about persons who are refugees, it also refers to those who are, due to external aggression, occupation, foreign domination, or events seriously disturbing public order, who are compelled to leave the country. So it's not just generalized violence per se. Regionally, in this region, certain definitions apply, and in some other places, refugee definitions apply. And for people who do convoluted, thanks.
I think we should let our master to finish the discourse, and then one more question,
Yeah,
and so close the day.
please ask. I mean,
now we have a deficit that young people in Romania, have a lot of migration for work in Spain, Italy, whatever.
pretty
Yes, and soon, I don't know, because our Partea is a middle future.
Yeah.
Uh, we will have a deficit at the working level. So I was wondering, we have a great opportunity now to make Romania a destination for refugees. So this deficit maybe will pay the pension for old people. No, it is a big issue for Romania.
It's going to be a big issue for Romania, but unfortunately, yeah, in the near future. But as a country, you cannot say that I'm going to receive a huge number of refugees or granted protection to a huge number of refugees just because I have a deficit working. There are working permits. Just let me to explain to you. There is alien law with official the immigration office into this, and there are official permits to work for foreigners in order to improve the situation that is also in the present, not only in the near future. So you cannot say, based on the Geneva Convention, that, oh, as a country, this is in my view, legally speaking, I'm going to receive many refugees just because I need people to work here in Romania because all Romanians left. So even if there is still this need, you should have, you should have other laws who can help the migrants in general who want to come to work in Romania to receive this type of visa and the working permit. And of course the refugees, if you ask me, in any society are a plus, like culturality, view and like input and like style of life, conception, changing the preconception in the country in which they arrive. On the long term, they are a plus for the community that is there. And
Most Western countries want to do that now, especially the French.
my origin and citizenship is Romanian, so
I
this
agree
is
with
from
you.
my view. And I think in Romania these things it should be indeed changed. We have another reality, geopolitically also and social reality, comparing with the Western countries. And I think that 10 or 20 years ago, even in the Western countries, the view was a little bit changed as it is now from other various reasons. But it's a political discussion, and I don't dare to enter in this. But I think the refugees are coming with a plus in the whole society. If I should put an end to our short discussion here, like this in a positive way. Even I just want to mention that about statelessness in Romania, most of the statelessness cases that we assisted um, in the last years were Palestinians declared as stateless people. In Romania, based on the law, there is not a procedure in order to deserve this status, comparing with other countries. Even Moldova Republic has such a procedure. But for the moment in Romania, because of the few number of cases, was not considered a priority by the Romanian authorities. But we hope that maybe there are going to be some changes due to also the pressure, if I should say, the international term of the UNHCR, who has the mandate also for the statelessness, like for the refugees. And we have Palestinians and some Cuba people which decided to renounce to the procedure, asylum procedure, and they stated that they are just stateless people, so they should receive a document in Romania like being stateless. Even we tried to explain that it's not so easy. I mean, I'm going to declare that from tomorrow I'm not going to be a Romanian, and I cannot use the document, the Romanian passport, just because I want to be written in Germany that I'm stateless. So it's a little bit complicated, and the discussion could be very extensive and a little bit boring, if you ask me, for the person that doesn't have a legal background. But we hope that also Romania will accomplish this international obligation, if I should say, because the procedure is going to be a similar one with the refugee status determination procedure, as we understand from discussions, for instance, with the Spanish embassy that has a similar procedure like this, and this is just an example that I keep in mind. So maybe you would like to know more details about this. I don't know how is the stage with the stateless procedure in Romania. But if you have any other questions, and anytime you can contact us, even for the voluntary part of the work, if you are interested in. And for me, it was a pleasure to see that indeed you are interested in like questions and like views. And you have the power to change the views in Romania. Thank you so much.
We thank you. Thank you for coming here today and talk us about this pressing matter at a global level. This is the end of our second day of the project. We thank you for the participants for coming here today. My request then is if and also to our speakers if it is possible to make a picture, photograph in the end. And also only to our participants, please remain at home. My boss has something to tell you. Well, now once again, thank you for